January 31st, 2020, the United Kingdom has formally left the EU, making it the first of its members to leave. The UK has been given an 11-month transitional period, starting from January 31st to December 31st, 2020, in making further negotiations with the EU in determining their future relationship. During this period, the UK will remain adhered to EU laws and its pre-Brexit trade agreements, as well as its EU membership privileges. Notable agreements which have been made between the two entities will be the implementation of Northern Ireland's EU membership status, making it the last British territory to be a part of the EU. NATO had reached its 17th anniversary, and with that, the world has changed significantly since its establishment back in 1949. As NATO divided between the US and the EU, leading it into the separate ways, and the UK, which had just left the EU in January, the London Declaration will be a stepping stone towards a whole new relation between the UK and the EU, especially within the NATO itself. In this presentation, we will be discussing on to what extent does the aftermath of Brexit has implicated NATO's conduct of its collective security principle.
The definition of realism differs from neorealism in the idea that states compete for survival not because of the innate selfish nature of humans, but because of the anarchical international system in which states compete for power and survival because of a lack of a regulating body controlling the states. States are unitary, rational actors because of a self-help system. How is this relevant to Brexit and NATO? Well, this case will provide an interesting analysis on how the UK and the EU would respectively influence NATO because of how the UK is an important member of NATO who wishes to become further involved with the alliance, and the EU who has often been blocked by the UK in defense and security integration and supposedly wants to quote-unquote replace the EU.
On to NATO's collective security principle. So NATO as an intergovernmental organization stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Its establishment was on the year of 1949, and its member states are mostly consisting of European countries as well as the United States and Canada. NATO, as an intergovernmental organization, was built on the premise of collective security by all member states against the Soviet Union at the time. NATO, as an intergovernmental organization, functions to cover political and military purposes of the member states, respectively. NATO also was founded towards the goal of European political integration, which at the time was yet to be accomplished due to the Soviet Union. Above all else, NATO has a single attribute to it that makes it special. As was mentioned in the previous slide, NATO was founded on the premise of collective security of its member states. This premise was institutionalized in Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, where in this article it is essentially stated that when a member state of this organization is being attacked, it would also evoke the collective defense of all other member states of NATO. While this principle in its nature is not one to be invoked so easily, it would also imply the measures to be taken towards the prevention of such threat. This was illustrated by how for the years that this organization has been established, NATO has only ever invoked their principle of collective security once, which was after the 9/11 attacks against the United States in 2001. This principle plays a very crucial role towards NATO, as its significance is most emphasized in the military utility of this intergovernmental organization. Among others, it is most demonstrated well by their standard maritime forces, as well as an integrated air defense system that is comprising of ballistic air missiles, as well as allied fighter jets that operate on an all-time and everyday basis.
In this section of the presentation, we are going to further discuss about the reforms and changes that occurred under Brexit and the ways in which those reforms may implicate UK's relationship with EU and ultimately the NATO. It is known that the reforms that had been agreed upon by both the United Kingdom and the European Union are entailed within a set of documents, and one of them is the one that is written within this particular slide, which would be elaborated further by my colleague.
The impact of Brexit is not only hitting the UK but also the EU. The UK has slowed down its economic growth by leaving the EU, and they will lose the benefits offered by the EU, such as free trade. The UK will now have to apply tariffs on export and import goods. Also within the UK, only Northern Ireland will still be considered as a member of the EU. Therefore, there will be customs and borders between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which will affect many commuters. The UK has to pay a divorce bill of £33 billion to the EU because of the delayment of Brexit, and then they will have to pay the budget set by the EU.
Although in this particular document there is no explicit elaboration or mentioning about issues pertaining to security, however, there are several articles that discusses about the potential exchanges between the European Union and the United Kingdom post-Brexit that is similar to the subjects that NATO had begun to form an interest in. Those subjects being the progression of telecommunication technologies, the use of cyberspace, the ongoing migrant crisis in Europe, terrorism, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, this document does explicitly state the reforms that would eventually shape UK's future relations with EU, NATO, and the global community as a whole once Brexit has officially come into terms. One of the points that had been agreed upon by both the United Kingdom and the Union is both of them being committed to have a greater cooperation between one another and other global actors, particularly NATO. However, at the same time, we can also see that the United Kingdom seems to have changed their foreign policy directions, namely into deepening and pursuing greater engagement with other global actors, particularly third world countries. This section of the presentation will further elaborate on the aftermath and implications of the reforms previously mentioned. One of the setbacks that we could identify from Brexit is how, in terms of ensuring regional security over Europe, now the United Kingdom has found itself to be faced with considerable difficulties in influencing and asserting its interests into the European Common Security Defence Policy, which belongs to the European Union. With the United Kingdom unable to assert its interests or to influence the said European Common Security Defence Policy, then attaining European regional security would be a lot harder as well. On the other hand, Brexit supporters argued that Brexit would eventually lead to greater cooperation between the alliance and the United Kingdom, because now the United Kingdom has only one regional membership, that being NATO. And also, these supporters argued that the United Kingdom would eventually make use of the platform provided by the alliance to further engage with the European Union, which would then help in the
obtaining process of regional security over Europe. Moreover, it is worth bearing in mind that with the tumultuous and unpredictable nature of contemporary international politics have only further reinforced the need for greater cooperation and collaboration between the United Kingdom's government and NATO. This is evident through the publication of the London Declaration during NATO's 70th anniversary summit in December of last year, which essentially reaffirms both of the parties' commitment towards maintaining the alliance's distinct collective security principle.
The UK has been rather ambitious with further supporting NATO even more, with it being one of the organization's most important members, deploying their military in crucial flanks in NATO territory. Their claims to support NATO may be fueled by an agenda to improve communications with other countries, especially with NATO's clean 70-year track record. However, they may be reckless in some areas that still have some lingering question marks, such as when it comes to matters of immigrations and the impact of the slowing economy on top of their divorce bill. If they are able to tread carefully, they may still be able to maintain positive relations with the EU and Europe as a whole through NATO. But whether or not the UK is able to carry through their promises and succeed with their agendas still remains uncertain.